The Bermuda grass tasted like fertilizer and regret. That's the first thing you notice when your face is unexpectedly slammed into a meticulously manicured suburban lawn. Not the heat, even though it was a blistering 110 degrees in Scottsdale, Arizona. Not the sheer baffling humiliation of the moment. No, it was the distinct chemical tang of high-grade nitrogen lawn food scraping against my front teeth. Click, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists, ratcheting tight enough to pinch a nerve. "Stop resisting, buddy," a voice sighed above me. It wasn't an angry voice. It was just tired. Like deeply, profoundly exhausted by the mere fact that it had to be speaking to me at this exact moment. I spit out a blade of grass. "I'm not resisting," I gasped, twisting my neck just enough to get a look at the heavy black boots planting themselves next to my shoulder. "I'm literally just trying to breathe. Also, you're arresting me on my own property." "Yeah, sure you are," the tired voice replied. A heavy hand grabbed my bicep and hauled me upward. The world spun for a second, a blur of harsh desert sun and aggressively green landscaping. When my vision cleared, I was standing face to face with Officer Miller. I knew his name was Miller because it was stamped onto his shiny silver nameplate, right above a badge that was currently reflecting the brutal Arizona sun directly into my retinas. He looked like a guy who had just wanted to eat his turkey sandwich in peace, but instead got dispatched to a noise complaint that escalated into a felony. And then, there was Brenda. She was standing safely behind Officer Miller, clutching a Pomeranian that looked like a dusty cotton ball. Brenda was a walking, talking cliché of wealthy suburban entitlement. She wore a pristine white tennis skirt, a visor that shaded exactly nothing, and a pair of sunglasses so large they could have intercepted satellite signals. "He was lunging at me, officer!" she shrieked. Her voice was the audio equivalent of chewing on tinfoil. "I felt completely threatened. My life was in danger. Fluffy was shaking." Fluffy, for the record, was currently licking its own nose and looking entirely unbothered. "I was standing next to a cactus," I said, trying to keep my voice level, which is remarkably difficult when your hands are bound behind your back like a captured spy. "I was literally just looking at the dirt." "He's a vagrant," Brenda countered, taking a dramatic step back and clutching her imaginary pearls. "Just look at him. He doesn't belong in this neighborhood. He was probably trying to case my house to rob it." I looked down at myself. Okay, fine. I wasn't exactly wearing my Sunday best. I had on a faded pair of cargo shorts, a sweat-stained gray t-shirt, and some beat-up sneakers. I had just driven 14 hours straight from Philadelphia to deal with my late Uncle Earl's chaotic estate, and I hadn't showered since somewhere around Albuquerque. I looked rough. But vagrant casing a house? Come on. "Officer," I said, forcing a calm, reasonable smile that probably looked totally deranged. "My name is—" "I don't care what your name is right now," Officer Miller interrupted, rubbing his temples. "What I care about is why you're trespassing on this woman's side yard." "It's not her side yard," I practically yelled, the frustration finally bubbling over. "It's my lot. I inherited it. My Uncle Earl passed away 3 months ago, and he left me this empty plot of land." I nodded my chin toward the expanse of dry, cracked earth stretching out behind us. It was a beautiful half-acre of absolutely nothing, sitting right next to Brenda's towering, stucco-clad McMansion. And right on the edge of that nothingness, encroaching onto the dirt like a brightly colored plastic tumor, was Brenda's patio furniture. A massive teakwood dining set, a propane fire pit, and a ridiculous hammock strung between 2 imported palm trees. "He's lying!" Brenda gasped, clutching the Pomeranian tighter. "Earl died, God rest his weird soul, and the bank took this land. It's abandoned. I've been maintaining it out of the goodness of my heart." "Maintaining it?" I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the audacity. "You put a fire pit on it. You're throwing neighborhood cocktail parties on my inheritance." Officer Miller sighed again. a long, drawn-out sound of pure administrative fatigue. "All right, buddy. You got ID?" "Yes," I said eagerly. "In my back left pocket." Miller awkwardly reached into my pocket and fished out my wallet. He flipped it open and stared at my Pennsylvania driver's license. "This says you live in Philadelphia," he noted, his tone flattening out completely. "I do," I explained, speaking as quickly as possible. "I just drove in. The deed transfer was finalized 2 weeks ago. I have the paperwork in my truck. Just let me show you." Miller looked at Brenda, who was currently doing a highly convincing performance of a woman on the verge of a panic attack. Then he looked at me, a sweaty, dirt-covered guy from the East Coast standing in the middle of a high-end Scottsdale subdivision. He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, run a property check on lot 442, Desert Ridge Estates." We stood there in silence for 2 agonizing minutes. The only sound was the rhythmic ch-ch-ch of a sprinkler system kicking on a few houses down. "Dispatch to Miller," the radio finally crackled. "County records show lot 442 is currently listed to the estate of Earl Higgins. No recent transfers populated in the digital system." My heart sank. The digital system. Of course. The county clerk's office was notoriously slow. I had the physical stamped deed sitting on the passenger seat of my Ford F-150, but because some underpaid clerk hadn't hit refresh on the database yet, I was officially a ghost on my own land. "Officer, please," I begged. "Just walk over to my truck with me. The paper deed is right there. It proves I own this." Brenda saw her opening and pounced. "He's trying to lure you to his vehicle. He probably has weapons. Arrest him. I want to press full charges. I want him in jail." Miller looked at the sky like he was asking a higher power for a different career path. Then he looked at me. "Sorry, man. System says it's not yours. The homeowner here says you're trespassing and causing a disturbance. I gotta take you in." "You're joking," I said, the reality of the situation crashing over me. "You're taking me to jail because of a slow computer system?" "I'm taking you to jail because you're trespassing and refusing to leave," Miller corrected, leading me toward the cruiser parked by the curb. "Refusing to leave? You literally tackled me into the grass." As he shoved me into the back of the sweltering police interceptor, I caught a glimpse of Brenda through the plexiglass window. She had dropped the terrified victim act entirely. She was standing on the edge of my dirt, right next to her illegally placed teakwood dining set, smirking at me. She actually gave me a little wave. The door slammed shut. The heat inside the cruiser was immediate and suffocating. The plastic seat stuck to my sweat-drenched shorts. I sat there as Miller climbed into the driver's seat and threw the car into drive. The humiliation was a physical weight on my chest. I had been dragged off my own property. I was going to be booked, fingerprinted, and tossed in a holding cell. All because a wealthy, entitled neighbor decided she liked my Uncle Earl's vacant lot better than I did. But as the cruiser rolled out of the subdivision, the anger started to morph into something else. Something colder. Sharper. Why was her patio furniture on my land? Uncle Earl was a quirky guy, but he wasn't generous. He guarded his property lines with the ferocity of a junkyard dog. He used to tell me stories about measuring his lot down to the millimeter just to spite the HOA. He would never have let Brenda set up a cabana club on his side of the dirt, which meant she didn't just casually expand her yard. She waited until he died, assumed the bank was taking it, and aggressively annexed it. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the hard plastic cage. My wrists throbbed. My face was covered in dirt. I was on my way to county lockup. But I wasn't just a guy from Philly anymore. I was a property owner in Maricopa County, and I was about to make Brenda's life a living, breathing, municipal code-violating nightmare. The Maricopa County holding cell smelled like bleach, old sweat, and despair. I spent 6 hours on a cold steel bench, listening to a guy named Snake explain his complex theories about the Federal Reserve. Every time the heavy metal door clanged open, I flinched. The adrenaline had completely worn off, leaving behind a dull, throbbing headache and a profound sense of injustice. Eventually, a bored-looking guard called my name. My lawyer, a buddy from back east who happened to be licensed in Arizona, and answered my frantic one phone call, had wired the bail money. When I finally stepped out of the precinct into the blinding late afternoon sun, I didn't feel relieved. I felt radioactive. The trespassing charges were still officially pending. I had a court date in 3 weeks. Brenda had effectively weaponized the police against me to protect her illegal patio furniture. I pulled my phone out of my evidence bag. It was dead. Perfect. I caught an Uber back to the subdivision, sitting in silence as the driver blasted talk radio. We pulled up to the edge of Desert Ridge Estates. I told him to drop me at the corner. I wasn't taking any chances of Brenda spotting me and calling Miller again. I walked the 2 blocks to where my truck was parked, keeping to the shadows of the palm trees like a fugitive. My F-150 was still there, baking in the heat. I unlocked the door, grabbed a warm bottle of water from the center console, and chugged it. Then I reached across to the passenger seat. There it was, a thick manila envelope. I tore it open and pulled out the deed. Signed, stamped, notarized. The legal transfer of Lot 442 to my name. It was an ironclad piece of paper that meant absolutely nothing to a cop staring at a delayed database. I needed more than a deed. A deed just proved I owned the dirt. I needed to prove exactly where that dirt started, and where Brenda's delusions ended. I plugged my phone into the car charger. As soon as it flickered to life, I bypassed my lawyer. I didn't need a defense attorney right now. I needed a specialist. I opened my browser and searched for Aggressive Land Surveyors Scottsdale. Most of the results were corporate firms, promising timely results and professional service. Boring. I scrolled down until I found a dusty, outdated website straight out of 2004. The logo was a transit level with crosshairs over it. Chalkline Charlie's Surveying. We find the line. You fight the war. I hit dial. Yeah, Chalkline, a voice barked. It sounded like the guy smoked gravel for breakfast. Hi, I said, clearing my throat. I need a survey done, immediately. Like, yesterday. Everyone needs it yesterday, Charlie rasped. What's the situation? I just got arrested for trespassing on my own lot because my neighbor claims her yard extends 20 feet into my dirt. I need the boundaries marked, and I need it done with absolute, undeniable, legally binding precision. Charlie chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Neighbor dispute? Love 'em. Hate fences, love lines. Where's the property? Desert Ridge Estates. A low whistle came through the speaker. Bougie territory. Lot of fake money, lot of assumed property lines out there. Those HOA presidents think they own the horizon. You got the deed? Got it right here. Cost you $1,500 for a rush job. Cash or cashier's check. I can be out there tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. That work for you? Charlie, I said, a grin finally breaking through my exhaustion. I will have coffee waiting for you. I slept in my truck that night. I parked in a Walmart lot a few miles away, tossing and turning in the stifling heat, replaying the arrest in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brenda's smug little wave. By 6:45 a.m., I was parked down the street from my lot, holding 2 black coffees. At exactly 6:59 a.m., a beat-up, aggressively lifted Chevy Silverado came tearing down the pristine suburban street. It was covered in dust and had a massive tripod strapped to the bed. It pulled up right behind my truck. A guy hopped out. He looked to be in his late 50s, sporting a salt and pepper beard, mirrored sunglasses, and a faded neon orange safety vest over a heavy metal t-shirt. He carried a clipboard like a weapon. You the trespasser? He asked, walking up to me. That's me. I handed him a coffee. Charlie took a sip, winced, and nodded. Good enough. Let's see the paperwork. I handed over the manila envelope. Charlie leaned against the hood of his truck, flipping through the pages, his eyes tracking the legal descriptions. All right, he muttered. Standard rectangular lot. Nothing crazy. The original plat maps for this subdivision were done in the late 90s. We're going to pull from the city monument down at the intersection, shoot the lines, and see exactly how much of your dirt this lady is stealing." He walked to the back of his truck and started pulling out gear. A robotic total station, heavy-duty tripods, and a terrifyingly large can of neon pink spray paint. "Listen," Charlie said, slinging a canvas bag over his shoulder. "When I start painting, people get mad, especially in these neighborhoods. You just stand back and let me work. If she comes out, you don't engage. You let her yell at the paint." "Understood," I said. We walked over to the edge of the property. The morning sun was just starting to crest over the McDowell Mountains, casting long shadows across Brenda's massive 2-story stucco house. Her yard was a masterpiece of exorbitant spending. Lush, impossibly green grass, a crime against nature in the desert, towering palm trees, the teakwood dining set currently sitting squarely on my uncle's dirt, and the crown jewel, a massive custom-built zero-edge infinity pool that seemed to spill over toward my lot. Charlie set up his tripod at the corner of the street, dialing in the coordinates. He worked in complete silence, adjusting knobs, looking through the lens, moving a reflecting prism around. I stood on the sidewalk, heart pounding. After about 20 minutes, Charlie picked up the can of neon pink spray paint. He walked to the front edge of the properties, right where my dirt met her grass. He looked down at his data collector. Pssh. A bright, glaring pink dot hit the curb. He walked exactly 20 feet into her grass. Pssh. Another pink dot. My eyes widened. The true property line wasn't just past her patio furniture. It was cutting deep into her established landscaping. Charlie kept walking, his eyes glued to the screen of his device. He was marching a straight, uncompromising line toward her backyard. A pink dot right on one of her imported palm trees. Pssh! A pink dot directly in the middle of her manicured putting green. I was practically vibrating with excitement. She is so screwed. Charlie reached the massive flagstone deck surrounding her infinity pool. He stopped. He looked at the screen. He looked at the pool. He frowned. He pulled out a measuring tape, walked to the far back corner of the lot, found an old rusty iron rebar pin buried in the dirt, and measured back. He walked back to the edge of the pool. He looked at me, pushed his mirrored sunglasses down his nose, and gave me a look of pure, unadulterated astonishment. "Buddy," Charlie rasped, "come look at this." I jogged over, carefully staying on my side of the imaginary line. "What is it?" Charlie pointed to the ground. "The property line runs exactly right here." He held up his hand, tracing an invisible barrier in the air. The line cut directly through the flagstone deck, sliced through the expensive glass safety fence, and plunged straight into the deep end of the infinity pool. "Wait," I breathed, my brain struggling to process the geometry. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," Charlie interrupted, a massive, predatory grin spreading across his face, "that roughly 30% of her $100,000 infinity pool, including the entire pump house structure over there, is sitting squarely on your property." I stared at the sparkling blue water. I looked at the little waterfall feature gently cascading over the edge. I looked at the expensive filtration system humming quietly behind a faux rock wall. It was on my land. She didn't just have her lawn furniture on my dirt. She had permanently excavated and built a massive concrete water feature over the property line. "Are you absolutely sure?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm a licensed surveyor in the state of Arizona," Charlie said, shaking the can of paint. "I don't guess. I measure." He bent down. Pssh! A thick, unmistakable neon pink line across the flagstone deck. Pssh! A pink line running directly up the side of her glass pool fence. He leaned over the water, pointing the can at the submerged tile. Pssh! A pink blob floated on the surface of the water, marking the exact spot where her pool became my pool. "Charlie," I whispered, "you are worth every penny of that $1,500. "I know," he said, packing up his gear. "Now you might want to brace yourself, because the dragon is awake." I turned around. Standing on the second-floor balcony of the McMansion wearing a silk robe and holding a mug of coffee, was Brenda. She wasn't wearing her sunglasses. I could see her eyes perfectly. They were wide, horrified, and tracking the neon-pink trail of destruction that Charlie had just painted across her personal oasis. "Hey!" she shrieked, the sound cutting through the quiet morning air like a siren. "What are you doing to my deck? I'm calling the police! I'm calling the HOA! I'm suing you for vandalism!" Charlie didn't even flinch. He just kept walking back to his truck. "She didn't just have me arrested," I muttered to myself, a manic, slightly unhinged laugh escaping my throat. "She had me arrested for trespassing on my own land, next to a pool she built on my own land." I looked up at Brenda. I didn't yell back. I didn't argue. I just gave her a little wave. The exact same wave she had given me from the back of the cop car. The game had fundamentally changed. This wasn't about patio furniture anymore. This was about thousands of gallons of chlorinated water, municipal zoning violations, and utter devastating revenge. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal caffeine. I checked into a cheap Motel 6, turned on my laptop, and went to war. I didn't want to just sue her. Lawsuits take years. They cost tens of thousands of dollars in retainer fees. The courts would drag it out, order mediation, and maybe, just maybe, force her to pay me a fraction of the land's value in a forced easement. That wasn't good enough. I didn't want her money. I wanted her to feel the exact same sheer, helpless panic I felt when those cold metal cuffs clicked around my wrists. I needed a faster, more aggressive angle. I needed to weaponize the city against her. I pulled up the Scottsdale Municipal Code online. I started reading through property regulations, zoning bylaws, setback requirements. Her pool was obviously an unpermitted encroachment. There was no way the city would have approved a permit to build a pool over a property line, which meant she, or her contractor, lied on the permit application. They likely submitted a forged site plan showing her yard extending into Uncle Earl's vacant lot. But how could I use that right now? I poured my fourth cup of terrible motel coffee and clicked into the health and safety ordinances. And there it was, glowing on my screen like a holy relic. Section 18 to 32, the attractive nuisance doctrine. I read it once, I read it twice. I started laughing so hard I choked on my coffee. By law, property owners in the municipality are strictly liable for any unsecured, unfenced body of water, excavation, or structural hazard on their premises that could reasonably attract and endanger minors. Failure to secure, fence, or immediately abate said nuisance upon discovery will result in an immediate citation, a daily fine of $500, and full legal liability for any resulting injuries or fatalities. I traced the words with my finger. Brenda's pool was 30% on my land. Technically, legally, I now possessed an unsecured body of water. Because the glass fence she built around the pool also crossed onto my property, and because she controlled the gate, I didn't have legal, secure access to enclose my side. According to the city, I was currently violating the attractive nuisance doctrine. If a kid wandered onto my vacant dirt lot and fell into the deep end of Brenda's pool, I could be sued. I could go to prison. I was legally obligated, nay, mandated by the great city of Scottsdale, to eliminate this severe safety hazard on my property immediately. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer buddy back east. "Hey man," he answered. "Did the surveyor figure it out?" "Oh, he figured it out," I said, pacing the small motel room. "Her pool is on my land. But listen, I need a quick legal sanity check. Arizona recognizes the attractive nuisance doctrine, right?" "Yeah, of course. It's standard tort law everywhere. Kids get drawn to dangerous stuff, pools, trampolines. Property owner is liable. And if there is an attractive nuisance on my property, I am legally required to abate it or secure it to avoid negligence, correct?" "Absolutely," he said, sounding confused. "Why? Is there an old well on the lot or something?" "No," I smiled. "There's a pool. Silence on the line. Wait, you just said her pool is on your land. 30% of it is, I clarified. The deep end. And the pump system. I could hear the gears turning in his lawyer brain. Oh my God. I cannot afford a massive liability risk, I said, feigning deep moral concern. I must comply with the city code. I need to abate the nuisance. Since I cannot secure it with a fence because it spans the property line, the only logical, legally compliant remedy is to permanently remove the hazard from my side of the property line. You're going to destroy her pool, he whispered. It wasn't a question. I'm going to erect a permanent code-compliant masonry wall directly on the true property line, I corrected him. If that wall happens to intersect a body of water that was illegally constructed on my property, well, that's just an unfortunate geographical coincidence. He started laughing. You have to notify her. Technically, you're modifying a shared boundary structure now. You need to give her formal written notice to cure the defect, or you will take action to mitigate your liability. Done. I'll draft the letter right now. Send it certified mail. Return receipt requested, he advised. You need proof she received it before you do anything crazy. I'm not doing anything crazy, I said innocently. I'm just following the law. I'm a sovereign citizen of this great municipality. I hung up and opened a blank Word document. I crafted the most polite, legally terrifying letter I could muster. Dear neighbor, it has recently come to my attention via a licensed boundary survey that a significant portion of an unpermitted water feature and associated mechanical equipment has been abandoned on my property, Lot 442. As you are likely aware, under Scottsdale Municipal Code Section 18-32, this unfenced body of water constitutes a severe attractive nuisance. As the property owner, I am exposed to immense liability should a minor be injured by this hazard. Please consider this formal notification that I will be taking immediate action to abate this nuisance and secure my property line to comply with city safety ordinances. I will be erecting a permanent boundary wall along the surveyed property line. This construction will commence in exactly 72 hours. I kindly suggest you make any necessary arrangements to secure the remaining portion of the water feature on your side of the property line prior to construction. Warmest regards. The Vagrant. I printed it out at the motel's front desk, drove to the post office, and paid the extra $4.15 for certified mail with a signature requirement. The trap was set. Now I just needed an army. You can't just walk into Home Depot and ask to rent a guy who can build a cinderblock wall underwater. That requires a very specific type of contractor. I needed someone who worked fast, didn't ask too many questions, and possessed a healthy disrespect for authority. I found Big Mike on a local community Facebook page under a post complaining about an unpermitted pergola. Mike had commented, "If the city didn't want us building it, they shouldn't sell the wood. HMU for framing and concrete." I called the number. We met at a diner off the highway the next morning. Big Mike lived up to his name. He was a mountain of a man, with a thick red beard, a high-vis shirt covered in concrete dust, and forearms the size of my thighs. He was currently demolishing a meatball sub with terrifying efficiency. "So," Mike said, wiping marinara sauce off his beard, "you're the guy with the pool problem." "I am," I said, sliding the survey map and a printout of the property photos across the table. "I need a cinderblock wall built on this exact line, 6 feet high, solid masonry." Mike looked at the photos. He looked at the pink line cutting through the water. He stopped chewing. "You want me to build a wall in the pool?" "No," I clarified. "I want you to drain my portion of the water, saw through the gunite shell along the property line, and build the wall on the dirt underneath." Mike stared at me for a long, quiet moment. He looked at the photos again. "This is an infinity pool," he noted. "I'm aware. If I saw through this, the whole thing drains out into your dirt. It ruins the structural integrity of the entire shell. Her side is going to be a useless, jagged crater. I'm aware. She's going to freak out. I'm counting on it." Mike took another bite of his sub, chewing slowly. You own the dirt? I have the deed and a stamped survey from Chalkline Charlie. At the mention of Charlie, Mike's eyebrows shot up. You used Chalkline? Man, that guy is crazy. He once spray-painted a mayor's golf cart because it was parked over a utility easement. He does good work, I smiled. Okay, Mike said, pulling out a grease pencil and writing on a napkin. Here's the logistics. We can't pour a footer underwater. We gotta drop an industrial trash pump into your deep end. Pump the water out into the street drains. Once the water level drops below the cut line, we bring in the wet saws. Diamond blades. We slice through the concrete shell. We bust it out with jackhammers. Dig a trench. Pour a quick-set concrete footer and start laying block. How fast can you do it? If I bring my whole crew, 3 guys, we can drain it, cut it, and have the first 3 courses of block laid in one day. But it's gonna be loud. And it's gonna be messy. Mike, I said, leaning over the table. I want it to sound like D-Day. What's the number? He slid the napkin over. It was a steep price, but I considered it an investment in my mental health. Deal, I said. We start Tuesday at 6 a.m. Tuesday morning arrived. The desert air was still cool, the sky a deep, bruised purple just before dawn. I sat on the tailgate of my truck, parked on the street in front of my vacant lot. I held a thermos of coffee, watching the neighborhood sleep. At exactly 5:55 a.m., I heard the rumble. 3 heavy-duty diesel work trucks turned onto the street, moving in a convoy. They towed a flatbed trailer loaded with pallets of cinder blocks, bags of Portland cement, a massive concrete mixer, and a portable generator that looked like it could power a small hospital. Big Mike pulled up onto the dirt lot, backing his truck right up to the edge of the property line. His crew hopped out. They didn't talk much. They moved with practiced, brutal efficiency. Mike walked over to me. She signed the letter? I pulled out my phone and showed him the USPS tracking confirmation. Delivered and signed for Brenda. She knows we're coming, I said. Or at least she was legally warned. All right, boys, Mike bellowed, his voice echoing off the stucco houses. Let's abate a nuisance. The chaos started immediately. One guy yanked the cord on the massive generator. It roared to life, a deafening, throbbing engine noise that shattered the peaceful suburban morning. Another guy grabbed what looked like a giant metal fire hose connected to a heavy yellow machine. This was the industrial trash pump. He dragged it over to the edge of the property line, right where Charlie's pink paint marked the boundary, and unceremoniously heaved it over the glass fence. Splash! The heavy metal intake sank to the bottom of the 10-foot deep end. Fire the pump, Mike yelled. The pump engaged with a violent shudder. A massive, thick stream of chlorinated pool water blasted out of the discharge hose, rushing down my dirt lot and into the street gutter. The water level in the infinity pool immediately started dropping. Fast. I looked up at Brenda's house. The lights were off. Not for long. The third crew member, a wiry guy named Hector, fired up the industrial wet saw. It was a massive, terrifying tool with a diamond-tipped blade the size of a pizza. Hector stepped up to the edge of the pool deck, lined the blade up perfectly with the neon pink spray paint, and pulled the trigger. Scrick! The sound of a diamond blade biting into flagstone and concrete is impossible to ignore. It is a high-pitched, bone-rattling shriek. Plumes of white dust and water sprayed into the air. Suddenly, the French doors on Brenda's second-floor balcony burst open. She ran out, wearing a fluffy pink bathrobe, her hair in messy curlers. She looked down at the scene in her backyard. The water level in her pool was already down a foot and dropping. A crew of strange men was systematically sawing her patio in half, and I was sitting on my tailgate, sipping coffee. "What are you doing?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Stop! Stop it right now! You're ruining my pool!" She disappeared from the balcony and came sprinting out the back door, running across her lawn barefoot. "Hey!" she yelled, running up to the glass pool fence. "Turn that machine off! I'm calling the police!" Big Mike looked at her, calmly reached into his cooler, pulled out a powdered donut, and took a bite. He didn't say a word. He just pointed a massive, dusty finger at me. Brenda turned her rage in my direction. She stomped over to the edge of the dirt. "You!" she shrieked. "You vagrant! You psycho! You're destroying my property!" "Good morning, Brenda," I said politely. "Actually, I'm abating an attractive nuisance on my property, as per the letter you signed for yesterday." "That letter was a joke!" she yelled. "I threw it in the trash! You can't do this! This is illegal!" "It's highly legal," I countered. "In fact, it's mandated by city code. I'm just a law-abiding citizen." Screek! Hector hit a piece of rebar in the pool deck. Sparks flew into the air. "I'm calling 911, Brenda screamed, pulling her phone out of her bathrobe pocket. "You're all going to jail! Every single one of you!" "Make sure you ask for Officer Miller," I called out after her as she ran back inside. I checked my watch. 6:15 a.m. The water level in the pool was down 3 feet. The expensive tile line was exposed, drying in the morning air. 10 minutes later, the distant wail of a siren started echoing through the neighborhood. I hopped off the tailgate and grabbed my manila folder. It was showtime. A Scottsdale police cruiser came flying down the street, lights flashing, and aggressively parked at an angle blocking my truck. The door opened. I couldn't believe my luck. It was actually him. Officer Miller stepped out of the cruiser. He looked exactly as exhausted as he had 3 days ago, only now he looked like he hadn't slept since then either. He surveyed the scene, the massive generator roaring, the water blasting into the street, the massive trench being sawed into the flagstone deck, and me, standing there holding a folder. Brenda ran out her front door, tears streaming down her face. "Officer," she cried, grabbing his arm. "Thank God you're here. Arrest them. Arrest him. He brought a gang to destroy my home." Miller looked at her, then looked at me. He let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. "You again," he said, walking towards me, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. "Buddy, I warned you about coming back here." "Officer Miller," I smiled. "It is wonderful to see you again. I am not trespassing. I am standing on my own property." "He's destroying my pool!" Brenda yelled, pointing at Hector, who was currently wrestling the wet saw down the side of the pool wall. "Turn off the machines," Miller ordered, looking at Big Mike. Mike lazily reached over and hit the kill switch on the generator. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of thousands of gallons of water rushing through the pump hose. "Turn the pump off too," Miller said. Mike obliged. "All right," Miller said, looking between me and Brenda. "Someone explain to me why you are cutting a swimming pool in half." Brenda started hyperventilating. "He's crazy. He's a stalker. He got arrested and now he's seeking revenge. He brought heavy machinery to ruin my life." Miller turned his tired eyes to me. "Well?" I opened the manila folder. "Officer," I said, my voice calm and practiced. "3 days ago, you arrested me for trespassing based on this woman's verbal assertion of her property lines. Because the county database was slow, I complied. However, I have since obtained the necessary documentation." I handed him the first paper. "This is the stamped, certified deed proving I am the sole owner of Lot 442. Miller took it, scanning the page. "This," I handed him the second paper, "is an official, certified boundary survey completed by a state-licensed surveyor. Chalk line Charlie. You will note the heavy pink line marked on the survey, which correlates with the neon pink spray paint currently running through the middle of that swimming pool." Miller looked at the survey map. His eyes widened slightly. He looked up, tracing the pink line across the deck and into the water. "Wait," Miller muttered. Her pool is on your lot? 30% of it, I confirmed, including the pump house over there, which is completely on my land. Now, as a responsible property owner, I consulted the Scottsdale Municipal Code. I handed him the third piece of paper. Section 18 to 32, the Attractive Nuisance Doctrine. I am legally liable for any unsecured body of water on my property. Because I cannot fence my portion of the water due to her glass enclosure spanning the property line, I am forced to permanently abate the nuisance to comply with the law. I pointed at Big Mike. I hired a licensed contractor to drain the water from my property, remove the encroaching concrete structure, and erect a solid masonry wall directly on the property line, thus securing my lot and resolving the code violation. Miller stood there in silence. He looked at the deed. He looked at the survey. He looked at the municipal code printout. He looked at the half-drained, violently mutilated infinity pool. Then a very slow, very subtle smirk crept onto Officer Miller's face. It was the look of a man who dealt with entitled, screaming HOA residents all day and was finally watching one get legally, comprehensively destroyed. "Officer!" Brenda demanded, stomping her foot. "Stop reading his fake papers and arrest him! It's vandalism!" Miller slowly handed the papers back to me. He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice completely devoid of sympathy. "According to this certified survey, this man is standing on his own property." "But my pool!" "Your pool," Miller corrected, "appears to be an unpermitted structure illegally built on his property." "He's draining the water!" she shrieked. "He is draining water that is sitting on his land," Miller said calmly. "And he is removing concrete that is poured on his land. I cannot arrest a man for modifying his own property." "This is a crime!" Brenda sobbed. "No, ma'am," Miller said, adjusting his duty belt. "This is a civil matter. If you believe your property line is different, you will need to hire a lawyer and file an injunction in civil court. Until a judge tells me otherwise, he has the legal right to build a wall on his property line." Miller turned to me. "You have a permit for the wall?" "Under 6 feet in Maricopa County doesn't require a permit if it's on the boundary line," I replied instantly. Miller nodded approvingly. "Nice. Try to keep the noise down before 7 a.m. next time." He turned and walked back to his cruiser. Brenda stood there, her mouth hanging open, utterly paralyzed by the reality of the situation. Her ultimate weapon, the police, had just told her to pound sand. As Miller's cruiser pulled away, Big Mike fired up the generator. The roar washed over us again. "Hey, Mike!" I yelled over the noise. "Fire the pump! Let's get this trench dug!" The pump blasted back to life. Hector picked up the wet saw and drove the diamond blade straight down into the pool wall. Squeak! I walked back to my tailgate, sat down, and took a long, satisfying sip of my coffee. Brenda slowly turned and walked back into her house, the glass door sliding shut behind her. The battle was over. The construction had just begun. I mean, honestly, if you've never seen a $100,000 infinity pool get violently reduced to a jagged, leaking crater before 8 a.m., you are truly missing out on one of life's most profound visual experiences. Like, you have to understand the sheer mechanics of what was happening here. The industrial trash pump was just relentlessly chugging away, blasting thousands of gallons of heavily chlorinated water out of my newly reclaimed deep end and sending it cascading down the dirt lot. It formed this beautiful, temporary river that washed over the curb and disappeared into the Scottsdale municipal storm drains. The water level was dropping so fast you could literally see the wet stain drying on the expensive imported Italian glass tiles Brenda had picked out. And then there was Hector. Hector was an artist, assuming the medium of art was high decibel destruction. He had wrestled the wet saw down into the shallow end, the diamond blade screaming as it chewed through the 6-inch thick gunite shell of the pool. Sparks were flying everywhere, mixing with the water spray to create this muddy concrete dust paste that coated everything within a 10-foot radius, including Brenda's pristine, leftover flagstone deck. I was just sitting on the tailgate of my F-150, drinking lukewarm coffee, watching this absolute symphony of malicious compliance unfold. Big Mike walked over, wiping concrete slurry off his forehead with a massive forearm. He looked down at the trench Hector was carving. "We're about to hit the rebar grid," Mike yelled over the roar of the generator. "Once we cut through the steel, the structural integrity of her side is going to be completely compromised. The whole shell might shift." "Is that a safety issue for us?" I yelled back. "Nah," Mike grinned, his red beard catching the morning sun. "We're on solid dirt, but her side is resting on compacted sand. When this water weight is gone and the tension is cut, her side of the pool is going to crack like an eggshell." "Sounds like an engineering defect on her unpermitted structure," I said, giving him a thumbs up. "Keep cutting." It took about 2 hours to completely drain my 30% of the pool. What was left at the bottom was, frankly, disgusting. A thick layer of slimy, algae-ridden muck, a handful of soggy tennis balls, and what looked like a pair of extremely expensive polarized sunglasses that had likely been lost during one of Brenda's illegal cocktail parties on my property. With the water gone, the real work started. Mike's crew swapped the wet saw for a pair of pneumatic jackhammers. The noise transitioned from a high-pitched shriek to a bone-rattling, concussive thudding that literally shook the dirt under my boots. They were systematically breaking the concrete shell into manageable chunks along the neon-pink property line, tossing the heavy pieces of debris out onto my dirt lot to be hauled away later. I was just starting to relax, actually enjoying the rhythmic violence of the jackhammers, when a white, custom-lifted golf cart came silently speeding down the street. It swerved aggressively toward my truck and parked halfway on the grass of Brenda's front lawn. Out stepped a man who looked like he had been genetically engineered in a country club laboratory. He was wearing impeccably pressed khaki shorts, a pastel pink polo shirt tucked in with a braided leather belt, and a visor that perfectly matched the polo. He was holding a clipboard like it was the 10 Commandments, and his face was twisted into a mask of absolute, unbridled bureaucratic rage. This had to be the HOA. He marched straight past my truck, completely ignoring me, and walked directly toward the property line where Hector was currently pulverizing the pool floor. "Hey!" the man screamed. He had a surprisingly high-pitched voice. "Hey! Cease and desist! Cease and desist immediately!" Hector didn't even look up. He had ear protection on, and honestly, even if he didn't, I doubt he cared. Big Mike, however, casually stepped in front of the guy, effectively blocking his path to the crater. "Can I help you, pal?" Mike asked, crossing his massive, dust-covered arms. "I am Richard Vance," the man puffed out his chest. "President of the Desert Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Who is in charge of this atrocity?" I hopped off the tailgate and casually strolled over, kicking a piece of broken concrete out of my way. "That would be me, Richard," I said, offering a friendly wave. "Just doing a little property maintenance. Beautiful morning for it, don't you think?" Richard whipped his head around, his eyes wet with fury behind his wire-rimmed glasses. You're the one destroying Brenda's pool. Brenda called me in hysterics. She said a gang of thugs was vandalizing her home. I am officially ordering you to halt all construction activities. You are in severe violation of the CC&Rs. "Oh, the CC&Rs, I nodded sympathetically. "Covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Nasty stuff. Lots of rules about paint colors and garbage can placement, right?" "This is not a joke!" Richard practically vibrated with anger. He started violently flipping through the pages on his clipboard. "You have unapproved commercial vehicles on the street. You are creating noise exceeding the community decibel limit. And you are altering a permanent structure without submitting a proposal to the Architectural Review Committee." I am issuing an immediate stop work order and fining you $1,000 per day until this is remedied." He dramatically thrust a pink piece of carbon copy paper toward my chest. I didn't take it. I just looked at it, then looked back at Richard. "Richard, buddy," I sighed, using my best, most condescending customer service voice. "I think you're a little confused. See, this right here?" I pointed down at the dirt. "This is lot 442, the estate of Earl Higgins, now officially owned by me." "I don't care who you are," Richard snapped. "You are in Desert Ridge Estates." "Actually," I smiled, a deep, genuine smile that I felt all the way in my toes. "I'm not. Because if you had actually checked your own master plat map before zooming over here in your little golf cart, you would know that my Uncle Earl bought this half-acre in 1994. The Desert Ridge Estates Homeowners Association wasn't incorporated until 1998. And Uncle Earl? He never opted in." Richard froze. The pink slip fluttered slightly in his hand. "What?" "Lot 442 is an unincorporated county island," I explained slowly, like I was talking to a toddler. "I am surrounded by your HOA, yes, but I am not in your HOA. I am not bound by your CC&Rs. I don't answer to your Architectural Review Committee, and your little pink slips have exactly as much legal authority over me as a used napkin." Richard's mouth opened and closed a few times, resembling a pastel-wearing bass fish. That's impossible. Brenda's property is in the HOA. You're destroying HOA property." "I am destroying an illegal encroachment on my sovereign property," I corrected him, pointing to the neon pink line that was still visible on the remaining glass fencing. "Brenda built her pool on my land. I am abating the nuisance, which I have every legal right to do." "But the noise, the commercial trucks," Richard stammered, his entire worldview crumbling before my eyes. "I'm on a public city street and my own private land," I said, stepping slightly closer to him. "Now, Richard, unless you want me to call the police and have you formally trespassed from my dirt, I strongly suggest you get back in your little electric buggy and go measure someone's grass height, because we have concrete to pour." I turned back to Big Mike. "Mike, the jackhammers are sounding a little sluggish. Can we turn the air compressor up?" Mike grinned a terrifying grin. "You got it, boss." Richard backed away slowly, his face flushed completely red. He practically sprinted to his golf cart, throwing it in reverse and peeling out with a whine of an electric motor. I took a deep breath of the dusty air. I mean, literally, shutting down an HOA president with an unincorporated land loophole? That was better than therapy. But the victory was short-lived, because just as Hector finally broke through the bottom of the pool shell, exposing the raw, wet earth underneath, Big Mike called me over to the far side of the property line. "Hey," Mike said, his voice actually sounding a little serious for the first time. "We got a problem over here." I walked over to where the pump house was located. Or rather, where it used to be. The crew had already taken sledgehammers to the faux rock enclosure that Brenda had built to hide her expensive pool equipment. The massive sand filter, the variable speed pump, and the salt water chlorinator were all sitting completely exposed on my dirt. "What's the issue?" I asked. "Just cut the PVC pipes and drag that junk onto her grass." "The pipes aren't the issue," Mike said, pointing a thick finger at a thick, gray conduit emerging from the ground and running directly into the pool's main electrical sub-panel. "That's a 220-volt dedicated line. It powers the whole pool system. The heater, the pumps, the lights, everything." "Okay, so?" "So," Mike sighed, wiping his hands on his pants. "It's live, and it's running underground, straight from her main housebreaker, across the property line, and up into this box on your land. I can't just hack through it with a saw. Someone will get electrocuted. We need an electrician to kill the circuit, or we need to pull the meter." I stared at the gray conduit. Brenda hadn't just built the pump on my land, she had run high-voltage underground utilities through my dirt. "Can we just shut it off at her breaker box?" I asked. "Sure." Mike nodded toward her massive stucco house. "If she lets you inside to flip the switch. which, judging by the fact that she's currently glaring at us from her kitchen window while on the phone, I'm guessing is a no. I looked up. Sure enough, Brenda was pacing frantically in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, staring daggers at us. Well, I said, rubbing my chin, I'm not going to ask her permission to shut off power to an illegal structure on my land. That defeats the whole purpose of malicious compliance. I looked at the electrical sub-panel mounted on the wooden post on my side of the line. It had a main disconnect switch right on the front of it. A big, heavy metal lever. If I pull that lever, I asked Mike, it kills the power to the equipment, right? Yeah, Mike said cautiously. But the feed line coming into the box from her house will still be live. We still can't safely demolish the conduit. Right. But if the equipment is dead, it's safe to unbolt it from the concrete pad and physically move the units themselves? I mean, yeah, if the disconnect is off, the motors are dead, but what are you getting at? Mike, I said, a slow, terrible idea forming in my brain. What happens to a $100,000 infinity pool when the filtration pump is permanently disconnected in the middle of an Arizona summer? Mike stared at me, doing the mental math. Without water circulation? And no chlorine generation? In this heat? He started to chuckle, a deep, rumbling sound. Give it 48 hours. The water left on her side will turn into a stagnant, mosquito-infested swamp. It'll go green faster than a golf course. The algae bloom will be catastrophic. Perfect, I said. I walked over to the sub-panel, grabbed the heavy metal lever, and yanked it down. Clunk. The low, constant hum of the variable speed pool pump instantly died. The silence was deafening. All right, boys, I yelled. Grab your wrenches, unbolt the filter, unbolt the pump, disconnect the chlorinator. I want all of this hardware physically detached and neatly stacked exactly 1 inch over the property line onto her grass. Leave the live electrical box attached to the post. We'll build the cinder block wall around it. Mike's crew went to work with terrifying speed. They took reciprocating saws to the PVC plumbing, slicing through the water lines like butter. Residual water gushed out, soaking the dirt. They unbolted the massive sand filter, which must have weighed 300 pounds, and rolled it like a barrel right across the neon pink line, crushing Brenda's perfectly manicured Bermuda grass. They did the same with the pump motor and the heater. Within 30 minutes, Brenda's entire state-of-the-art aquatic life support system was reduced to a pile of disconnected plastic and metal junk sitting uselessly on her lawn. And right on cue, the sliding glass door slammed open. Brenda came marching out. She had changed out of her bathrobe and was now wearing battle attire, designer yoga pants and a tight athletic top. She was holding her phone up, recording me. "I have you on camera," she screamed, her voice shaking with rage. "I have it all on video. You are destroying private property. You tampered with my utilities. My lawyer is on the phone right now, and he says you are committing a felony." "Brenda," I sighed, leaning against the wooden post that held the now useless electrical panel. "You really need to get a new lawyer, because I haven't touched your property. I merely removed abandoned equipment from my property and politely returned it to you." "You cut my pipes!" she shrieked, pointing at the severed PVC sticking out of the ground. "Your pipes were illegally trespassing," I countered. "Honestly, you should be thanking me. I saved you the cost of a demolition crew, though I will be sending you a bill for the dirt remediation where your pool water flooded my lot." Brenda looked at the pile of expensive equipment sitting on her grass. Then she looked at the massive, jagged trench that used to be the deep end of her pool. The water level on her side was now completely stagnant, resting a good 4 feet below the tile line. She lowered the phone. The sheer reality of the situation finally seemed to be penetrating her armor of entitlement. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice suddenly dropping into a bizarre, fragile whine. "Why are you so mean? It was just a little mistake. The pool company must have misread the map when they built it. We could have just talked about this. You didn't have to ruin my oasis." I stared at her. The audacity was truly breathtaking. "A little mistake?" I repeated, my voice dropping the sarcastic tone and going completely flat. "Brenda, you watched the cops throw me into the back of a cruiser. You stood right there, next to your illegal fire pit, and you smiled at me while I was hauled off to a concrete cell for standing on my own inheritance. You didn't want to talk then. You wanted me in a cage." She flinched, taking a step back. "So don't play the victim," I continued, gesturing to the chaos around us. "This? All of this? This is just the geometry of consequences. Now, please, step back. We are pouring a concrete footer, and I'd hate for you to get splashed." I turned my back on her and walked over to where Hector was mixing the first batch of quick-set concrete in the wheelbarrow. "Pour it," I told him. They started dumping the heavy, wet concrete into the trench they had dug straight through the floor of the pool. It settled into the dirt, forming a thick, gray foundation perfectly aligned with Charlie's neon pink spray paint. By 2 p.m., the footer was set enough to start laying block. Watching a cinder block wall go up is a mesmerizing process. It's repetitive, exact, and incredibly final. Big Mike was a master mason. He slathered mortar onto the concrete footer, dropped the first heavy gray block perfectly on the line, tapped it with the handle of his trowel to level it, and scraped off the excess. Slap, drop, tap, scrape. Block by block, the wall started to rise out of the ashes of the infinity pool. It was a brutalist monument to property rights, slicing directly across the space where wealthy people used to float on inflatable flamingos. As they started on the third course of blocks, another vehicle pulled up to the curb. This one wasn't a police cruiser or a golf cart. It was a plain white Ford Escape with the seal of the city of Scottsdale slapped on the door. "Oh boy," Big Mike muttered, pausing with a trowel full of mortar. "Code enforcement." A guy stepped out of the car. He looked like the definition of a municipal employee. Short-sleeved button-down shirt, a clipboard, and an expression of profound boredom. He walked up the driveway, sidestepping the puddles of muddy pool water. Brenda practically flew out of her house. "Thank God!" she yelled, running up to the inspector. "Are you from the city? I called hours ago. Look at what this maniac is doing. He's building a wall in my pool without a permit. Stop him!" The inspector, whose name badge read Dave, adjusted his glasses and looked at the half-built cinder block wall. Then he looked at the severed pool shell. Then he looked at me. "You the property owner?" Dave asked me. "I am," I said, walking over and pulling out my manila folder. I was getting really good at this routine. Lot 442. Unincorporated county island, though still subject to city safety ordinances. Here is the deed, and here is the certified boundary survey. Dave took the paperwork. He examined the survey closely, tracing the lines with a pen. "As you can see, Dave," I said smoothly, "a significant portion of my neighbor's water feature was illegally constructed on my property. In accordance with Section 18 to 32 of the Municipal Code, the attractive nuisance doctrine, I am currently abating the hazard to limit my liability. And since Maricopa County guidelines state that boundary walls under 6 feet do not require a building permit, I am entirely within my rights to erect this cinder block wall on the exact property line." Dave looked up from the papers. He looked at Brenda. "Ma'am," Dave said, his voice a dry, bureaucratic monotone. "He's right. He doesn't need a permit for a boundary wall under 6 feet. And if this survey is accurate, which it appears to be, he is mitigating a code violation on his side." "He's ruining my property!" Brenda shrieked. "Where is my protection?" Dave pulled a thick file out of his own clipboard. "Actually, ma'am, since you called code enforcement and gave us your address, I went ahead and pulled the original master permits for your parcel." Brenda stopped screaming. Her face went completely pale. "According to the site plan submitted to the city 5 years ago," Dave continued, flipping open the file, "your pool was approved to be built with a 15-foot setback from the western property line. Furthermore, there is absolutely no permit on file for the construction of a permanent pump house structure, nor the trenching of high-voltage electrical lines. I literally had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud. Brenda had called the city to stop me, and in doing so, had invited a vampire into her own house. "Wait," Brenda stammered. "My contractor handled all the paperwork. I didn't know." "Ignorance of the code is not an excuse, ma'am," Dave said, pulling a pad of aggressively read tags out of his pocket. "The city takes unpermitted high-voltage electrical work extremely seriously. Furthermore, because your pool shell has been structurally compromised and no longer holds water properly, it is now considered an abandoned excavation on your property." Dave started scribbling furiously on the red tag. "I am issuing an immediate notice of violation," Dave announced, peeling the red sticker off the backing. "You have 14 days to hire a licensed structural engineer to assess the remaining pool shell, submit retroactive architectural plans for the pump equipment, and secure proper electrical permits. Failure to comply will result in a $1,000 per day fine, and the city will place a lien on your property." He slapped the bright red sticker directly onto her glass patio door. "Have a nice day," Dave said, handing me back my folder. "Nice straight wall you got going there, buddy. Keep up the good work." Dave walked back to his Ford Escape and drove away. Brenda stood there, staring at the red tag on her door. The reality of the situation had finally crushed her. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She just slowly slumped down onto her patio furniture, put her head in her hands, and started sobbing. "Hey, Mike," I called out, turning my back on her misery. "Let's push for 6 courses of block today. I want to get this thing at least chest high before we lose daylight." Over the next 3 days, the wall went up. It was a beautiful, grueling process. The construction noise became the new soundtrack of the neighborhood. Brenda never came outside again. She kept all her blinds drawn. The only sign of life from her house was the occasional appearance of a very stressed-looking guy in a suit, who I assumed was the structural engineer Dave had mandated she hire. By Friday afternoon, the wall was finished. It was exactly 6 feet high, stretching 40 feet across the property line, cutting directly through the ghost of the infinity pool. Big Mike had even taken the time to strike the mortar joints perfectly, giving it a clean, professional finish. The contrast was jarring. On my side, I had a flat, empty dirt lot and a pristine gray masonry wall. On Brenda's side, she had a destroyed patio, a stagnant, green, half-empty pool of putrid water, and a pile of unhooked equipment killing her grass. Mike and his crew loaded up their trucks. "You know," Mike said, wiping his hands on a rag and leaning against his truck door, "I've built a lot of walls in my life. Retaining walls, privacy walls, load-bearing walls. But I gotta say, man, this is the most beautiful wall I've ever built." "It's a masterpiece, Mike," I said, handing him an envelope thick with cash. "You and the boys earned every penny. Go buy some steaks." "Appreciate it, boss. Good luck with the dirt." Mike fired up his diesel truck and rumbled away, leaving me alone on the lot for the first time in almost a week. The silence was incredible. No generators, no wet saws, no jackhammers, just the hot desert wind blowing through the scrub brush. I walked over to the wall and ran my hand along the rough cinder block. It was still warm from the sun. I stepped back and admired the sheer, uncompromising geometry of it. Was it petty? Absolutely. Had I spent thousands of dollars just to prove a point? Yes, I had. But as I stood there, looking at the physical manifestation of boundaries and consequences, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email from my lawyer in Philly. Subject, settlement offer. Brenda's legal team. I opened it. "Hey man, just got off the phone with your neighbor's attorney. They want to settle. They are formally withdrawing their criminal trespassing complaint against you with the police department. The DA already signaled they wouldn't touch it anyway. In exchange for you not suing her for the false arrest, malicious prosecution, and the cost of the property survey, they are offering to write you a check for $15,000. She's apparently hemorrhaging money trying to get the city code enforcement off her back and needs this to go away. Do you want to counter or accept? I smiled, staring at my beautiful gray wall. I typed out a quick reply. Accept the $15,000. And tell her lawyer that if she ever lets so much as a stray dog onto my dirt again, I'll build the wall another 2 feet higher. I hit send, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and walked over to my truck. I still had to figure out what I was actually going to build on Uncle Earl's lot. A house? A massive garage? A giant middle-finger-shaped topiary? The possibilities were endless. But whatever I built, I knew one thing for sure. The property lines were secure. I climbed into the driver's seat, rolled down the windows, and cranked the radio. I threw the truck in gear and drove away, leaving Brenda to deal with her swamp, her red tags, and the cold, hard reality of pettiness.